Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Sharon Florentine. Welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar, Cyber Attacks from the Open Source Perspective, brought to you by WhiteSource. I am super excited about this presentation today. We have a great webinar for you, but I need to go through a couple housekeeping items first. The webinar today is being recorded, so if you miss any of it or you just want to go back and watch it again, you'll be able to do so. We'll be sending a link after the presentation that will tell you how to access the webinar on demand, or you can go to securityboulevard.com/webinars and find it there. We are taking questions from the audience, so don't be shy. Get your questions in for our presenters today. You can put those right into the Q&A tab there on your webinar console. And stick around till the end where we will be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So stick around and see if you are a winner. All right, with that, I am thrilled to introduce today Zvika Ronen. He's the CTO at FOSSAware, and
Hi.
Sam Quakenbush, who's a sales engineer manager at WhiteSource. They're going to talk about a framework for addressing open source vulnerability challenges and securing software supply chains. I'm going to put myself on mute and turn my camera off and let these two gentlemen get right into it.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. So, my name is Zvika Ronen. I have 20 years of experience in high-tech industry and seven years in open source risk technology aspects. I also hold a bachelor degree in law and expertise in open source software licensing. I was the tech due diligence in Amdocs. I was the one who scanned all the code base of the target companies that Amdocs acquired. Today, I am the CTO of the CTO of FOSSAware. Few words about FOSSAware. We are 3 partners. Prior to FOSSAware, we manage the open source domain in Amdocs, companies with tens of thousands of developers. Each one of us has a different background and experience, and together we founded FOSSAware as an open source risk analysis and management service and consulting company. So, what is a software supply chain attack? A software supply chain attack occurs when a malicious actor gains access to an organization system through malware installed on software of trusted third-party partner or provider. The malicious actor infiltrates a legitimate application, then change source code and hide malware in build and update process with the intention of distributing the malware downstream automatically to a wider audience. In this type of attack, the original victim is not the final target, but rather a stepping stone to many other potential networks. The trusted vendor is unaware that they are sending malicious code to their customer. These steps of attack works because they occurred when user update software built by a vendor that they already have a relationship with a trust. When malicious code is installed on the target organization side, it runs with the same permission as the trusted application. Depending on the popularity of the interface applications, software supply chain attack have the potential to reach a larger number of victims. Published statistics show that last year, 21% of enterprise experienced open source based breaches. So perhaps the biggest breach of 2020 was a supply chain attack involving SolarWinds Orion platform. The Orion software monitors network performance, log files, storage, config files, and database. 18,000 SolarWinds customers that use Orion were attacked. Most of the United States Fortune 500 companies were attacked by a malicious actor. According to the US officials from last Thursday, they formally blamed Russia, supporting the hacker group called Cozy Bear. These Cozy Bears injected malware into one of the Orion tools during the build process. That software update was then automatically distributed downstream to Orion customers, including Microsoft, Cisco, Intel, NVIDIA, VMware, and some US federal government agencies. This attack was successful and went unnoticed for months because the software update appeared to be legitimate. Updates were signed off by SolarWind, and customer had no reason to suspect that a compromise has occurred. The malware contained in the SolarWind update opened a backdoor to infected system, giving hackers access to the interface of any company using the Ryan platform. In the SolarWind breach, the supply chain was the attack vector used to distribute the malware. SolarWind's customer, and not SolarWind itself, were the intended target. Interesting angle of this story is a post published 1 year back by SolarWind. They wrote that using open source is like eating from a dirty fork that everyone has access to. Perhaps they're against open source in general, but while most of their supportive systems are based on 70% open source in average, their servers operating system hacked, the VMware logs hacked, their Visual Studio build system hacked. We saw such wide use of open source in SolarWind supply chain, it's a must to have a clear and strong open source risk management program. Regarding the blame of the Russia has denied responsibility for the hacking campaign, and I'm not taking stand for that. So while SolarWind's still in the news, we just got a new supply chain attack. Kotkov is a recent case from the past weeks. Kotkov makes software auditing tools that allow developers to see how thoroughly their own code is being tested. This process can give the tool, the Kotkov tool, access to stored credentials and from various internal software accounts. Hackers tampered Kotkov software development tool similar to SolarWind and got access inside 9 US government agencies and about 100 private companies. Kotkov has 19,000 customers, including big tech service providers like IBM, HP. These giants are now investigating if any of their customers got hurt, means another supply chain, as a result of the downstream supply chain. Kotkov published that hackers began tampering with its software on January this year, and it was only detected earlier this month in April, just because the customer raised a concern. Kotkov instruction to their customer, you can see it in the slide, is we strongly recommended immediately re-roll the credentials, token, or keys located in the environment variable in their CI process that use one of Kotkov bash uploader. Is it the end of this supply chain? I'm not sure. Kotkov is also used in open source other projects. It is possible that some of these are still using the malicious version. Other open source projects probably released a correction, but if a company is not monitoring its open source use, they will not know about it. So supply chain can also be dependencies, not only the whole software. Let's review this one. Another supply chain attack was the work of a researcher and ethical hacker, Alex Birsan. In a nutshell, Birsan took advantage of a design flaw in how open source system handle dependencies to push malware into target system. It began with a package JSON file from NPM that used internally by PayPal. Birsan noticed that PayPal file contained a mixture of public NPM and private dependency. He assumed that the private package name were most likely hosted internally by PayPal because they did not exist in the public NPM registry. So he wondered what would happen if someone will upload malicious code to the public NPM under the same name of the private package names. Would PayPal internal project start defaulting to the new external, now defaulting public packages instead of the private one internally? So it took this package and he uploaded duplicate packages to some other repository. Beside NPM, there were PyPy and RubyGems to test this theory. It turned out that if a dependency package used by an application existed in a higher version in public open source repository, the public package was automatically given priority. This is why I call that a dependency confusion. This bug allowed Bursan to launch a supply chain attack against multiple high-profile enterprises like PayPal, of course, Apple, Microsoft, Tesla, and more. Bursan uploaded these packages from his own account with a disclaimer. This package is meant for security research purpose and does not contain any useful code. For his effort, Bursan earned $130,000 from 4 different bug bounties program. Nice profit, great initiative, but a serious concern. So what happens when someone makes easy money? Here comes the copycats. The disclosure of dependency confusion exploit led copycat researchers and bounty hunters to publish thousands of packages to the same repositories to try and get these bug bounties. Dependency confusion problem is likely to grow. Not all copycat players are ethical hackers who are seeking for bug bounties. Now, hackers who became familiar with this tactic are now trying to hijack dependency component, hopefully pulled as part of a software update. What should be done to avoid dependency confusion? The developer must control the software build and update process, including the dependency. The danger with automatic update may lead to upgrading to malicious package installation. So be aware, control every component in your product, including the dependencies. Let's review another supply chain weakness. When running pip download command, the package is downloaded to the local file system. Sound logic. The only downloading, the only, in scare quotes, downloading the package command shouldn't run any code, but this is not what happens sometimes. When someone downloads a Python package via pip in a targz format, pip will automatically run the code inside the setup with py script, which is part of this package. The Python's package manager tried to understand the metadata of the downloaded package and its version and list off additional dependencies. This process happens in the background. Now, the purpose of this setup py file is to return a data structure to hint the package manager and how to handle the package. Now, if an attacker who understands this process can plant malicious code in the script and gain code execution on any system that just download the library, even though the system did not intend to run this package at all. Guys, this behavior is not a bug. It's a feature in pip design, even though it sounds unintuitive. When a developer wants to download package, it does not expect the code to run on his system automatically. This issue was reported by a Python packaging authority in the past, and it's still unresolved to this day. There are some workarounds like working directly with PyPy simple API or using package list above the directory structure and save as. But when running this pip download, you should be aware of this behavior. So supply chain is not only about software, it's also about third-party hardware. Weakness in the supply chain might be in a supply chain, third-party supply chain hardware. Sometimes it's some external service which attach to your organization information system. This is a story about Ranad, a service provider which sells time attendance machine. In the past, these machines were mechanical with some date and time printed on a paper card with the click sound. Today, these boxes attach to a third-party vendor management system. It also connects from the other side to your Active Directory with all your employees' personal information, sometimes including medical approval provided by your employee against sickness day. This is exactly what happens in the Ranad breach. All of this information just breached out. In some organization, the data even contain biometric info like fingerprint, face detection. A breach in this third-party vendor will put your data privacy in a risky situation. Are you sure that your service provider, which in charge of your sensitive data, really managing this software in a way that you can sleep in peace at night? Zero trust as a term should act in any domain and any service. What you know about your service sold, your valuable data, think about it and ask your vendor the right questions. So everyone loves open source, is it? Even Microsoft former CEO Steve Ballmer, at first he called the Linux open source operating system a cancer. This was in the past. Still, time passed, and Microsoft is now one of the leaders of the open source movement with the acquisition of GitHub for $7.5 billion, and GitHub that acquired NPM last year. NPM is a critical part of the JavaScript world. It has millions of package managers and billions of downloads every week. Remember the dependency confusion? It was on NPM. So why we're talking about loving open source in cybersecurity webinar? The answer is soon to arrive. Open source has become an essential part of modern software development. The software we use today has become a mixture of proprietary, third-party, and open source. The use of open source has constantly been rising. Today, there is no field involving technology that does not include the use of open source. We find it in cars, medical devices, cell phone, any connected device or software you can think of. Companies have embraced open source since its benefits are clear and obvious. With open source, it's easy to turn an idea to product. There is no need to write every line from scratch, and the time to market is shorter. Today, over 70% of the average commercial software is open source, and over 450 components per product. So why we're talking about loving open source in cybersecurity webinar? Because hackers also love open source. Open source security vulnerability are defined as one of the OWASP top 10 risks in secure code development methods. These known vulnerabilities are really known because they are published in the National Vulnerability Database, the NVD. So if a hacker knows that you're using some open source with a published vulnerability that explains precisely the area of weakness, it's a good hint for him to start his exploiting actions. Along with the increased use, we also see an increase in the number of non-vulnerabilities reported. Almost 10,000 new open source vulnerabilities were reported in the last year alone. It's not that the numbers 4 years ago were low. Even then, with approximately 1,400 vulnerabilities that were reported, things didn't look good. The rise in number is just an exponential, as in the bad day of COVID-19. Here, the vaccine doesn't work. We need to change the understanding of what needs to be done and how to proceed correctly. To proactively avoid non-vulnerabilities, you need to manage your open source usage. If a release version are not monitored post-production, you may find a zero-day threat becomes a non-vulnerability on a software you provided to one of your customers, and another supply chain failure just started. So how popular is open source software anyway? Let's take Lodash, for example, a program that helps programmer in JavaScript modularity. Lodash is being downloaded in an average of 42 million times every week. Lodash is also the open source library with the most reported vulnerability for 2020. So how hackers exploit open source for malicious code? The Academy took it seriously and investigate cyber incident that used open source component to understand how hackers work. They found that hackers really like to use popular open source library as a platform to inserting their malicious code, and I'll give an example in the next slide. Their favorite technique is called typo squatting. In 61% of the cases, they use similar name to existing popular open source libraries with a single character change, like changing the L with a capital I. Uh, and then it seems to be like the original name. Jellyfish in this example existed for almost a year in this fake configuration until it was discovered. What we're learning here, that an organization that does not properly manage its list of components and its programmers are looking for libraries in free text, they can easily fall into this trap. So let's take event stream as a use case for a hacker taking advantage of a popular open source package. So popularity, not a Lodash, just 2 million downloads per week. This open source library was created by a New Zealand developer named Dominic Tarr. Dominic was tired at some point of maintaining this code voluntarily, and he gets one day an offer from some Japanese programmer to help in scare quotes, help him to maintain this library. This nice Japanese also helped himself and introduced a malicious code into one of the library dependencies. The intention was to steal keys from Bitcoin wallets. He did pretty well and stole 7,000 Bitcoins, which are around $420 million as today rate, if not mistaken. A nice profit. Dominic's response can be seen in this slide. I don't get anything from maintaining this module. Means you need to secure your code, not on the maintainers has legit motives. So what should be done? Let's review this iceberg model and understand why should we pay attention. Because both open source dependency and third-party content can cause supply chain failures. When dealing with known security vulnerabilities of components that we, the developer, put into the product, the first rule is choosing the right open source component, a secure one with a supportive community behind it. Of course, it's only relevant to the part that we actively choose and not to the components that arrived as a transitive dependency. There are many parameters for choosing an open source component, and the CII quality badge is one of them. We will see it in the next slide. For vulnerability arriving from third-party commercial products that we integrate into our software or into our network, we should ask for the list of open source components embedded in the software and in the format that will allow us to check for known vulnerabilities. If we're talking about choosing right, which I just mentioned, choosing right our open source component, we want to select one that has some discussion about security topics. There is a best practice badge that is worth knowing. This badge is called CII and is divided into 3 quality levels: passing, silver, and gold. Giant brands participating in this project are leading firms globally, and you can see in the right part of this slide some of the most popular open source software in the world that already have some kind of badge in some level. The project is under the OpenSSF, Open Source Security Foundation, which is part of the Linux Foundation. The take-home message of this slide is that choosing open source components, it's not about its functionality, but also about its security level. So you ask yourself, what is my weakest link? Don't let open source be your weakest link. And you don't want to be the next Equifax. So let's talk about Equifax. Equifax perhaps is the best known case in cyber community. For those of you who are not familiar with that, Equifax is a credit rating company traded on NASDAQ. It has all the information security system required by the US regulator, but open source was its weakest link. In 2017, when the number of reported vulnerability in open source was less than 1/3 compared to 2020, a known vulnerability was published in the NVD database, a component called Apache Struts. Equifax did not properly manage their open source, and the result was an information leak of half of the population of the United States. Data of 147 million people. A patch for this vulnerability was released in early March, and the data breach started 2 months after. This breach was 100% preventable. The cost of this breach for Equifax was estimated by a minimum of $1.4 billion. This is my last slide, so let's summarize. Third-party software and open source require risk management. Choose safe open source component with stable maintainer. Know your third-party product content. Ask for disk information. Set a risk management program for your organization and include the open source part. Be aware, take action, and stay compliant. And remember, the biggest risk is the one that you're not aware of. Thank you.
Thanks, Zvika. So I'll go ahead and take over the screen sharing now. Hello, everyone. So my name is Sam Quakenbush, and I'm a sales engineering manager here at WhiteSource. I have over 10 years of experience in the application security field, globally helping enterprise customers deploy application security programs, including static analysis, dynamic analysis, and software composition analysis. So today I'd really like to talk about shifting left responsibly. So this phrase is incredibly important and probably overused, but it's also very misunderstood by the industry right now. In application security, we should absolutely be trying to shift left by addressing problems sooner in the SDLC and with the right equipment. But what this doesn't mean is to shift the responsibility to developers alone. A successful AppSec program is not measured by the number of interruptions to a developer's day, but actually the opposite. So we learned this actually with GitHub. So WhiteSource and GitHub partnered a few years ago, and with their security alerts, they use WhiteSource's database. And what we learned really is a lesson in automated security alerts. When we first rolled this out together, it was blowing up GitHub with security alerts, and developers were not happy with these uninvited interruptions. And there was a lot of pushback, and basically everyone turned it off. So what this shows us is if you get too many alerts, it just becomes noise, and developers will almost always turn it off. So we need to have a shared responsibility. It's not just shifting it left to the developers. So the WhiteSource approach for developers is actually to minimize the variety and frequency of interruptions to a developer's day and to adapt the security tools to the developers, not vice versa. So putting the information directly in their interface versus making them jump out to yet another security tool. So with this, we have interface preferences for the IDE lovers. So whatever IDE you use, we have an integration with that. We have a command line for developers, and of course the repo integrations, which is where most developers live nowadays, is their source control. So we have a rich integration with repositories and GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket that pushes this vulnerability data directly into the source control so developers can use it. And it also gives pull requests for automated remediation. And then you have check runs on pushes and pull requests for that instantaneous feedback. So yeah, I'm talking about repo integrations. A common or immature repo integration approach to shift left is actually security tools typically scan on every pull request and they report every single vulnerability found. So this ends up failing or blocking developers' merge requests since the base branches typically has a ton of outstanding vulnerabilities. So even though you didn't add any new vulnerabilities, your merge request is blocked because the scanning tool is showing that there's vulnerabilities in that branch, even though you didn't add them. So a mature repo integration approach, or how WhiteSource approaches this, is actually to only interrupt if a pull request introduces errors, and then we give positive feedback when a pull request actually solves previous vulnerabilities that are coming from the base branch. So with this approach, you can actually install our software composition analysis on every repository across your organization without causing friction or interrupting your current workflows. So vulnerabilities will always be discovered in open source components, even if the industry gets better at avoiding them. So there's actually a couple of different things. There's 4 real approaches you can take to open source usage. So what are the options they have? Well, they have 4 options, and 2 of them are bad. One's okay, and the last is obviously the best. We could either stop using open source, right? But that's not really an option with the business's pressure to release applications faster every day. We could also just ignore these threats in open source code, but no one really wants to end up with their face plastered across the news like all of the examples Vika just gave us. So the next option is where a lot of companies already are or where they're headed, which is a reactive approach. So to react only when there's problems, and WhiteSource can absolutely support this approach with automated fixes and alerts within the source control that are introduced via pull request, just like I was talking about. So it's not interrupting the day-to-day flow. But really, the best approach is where WhiteSource is a market leader. We want to adopt a proactive approach to dependency maintenance. And many of our enterprise customers are actually doing this and have rolled this out in environments with thousands of developers. So this approach makes sense, right? Why would we not always be upgrading? About 84% of CVEs that are disclosed already have a fix that's made public, just like in the Equifax example that Zvika just talked about. So what's holding us back from actually doing this upgrade? Well, it takes time and it might break. So then our regression tests are going to fail and we'll be back to square one with the original library that was vulnerable. So this is actually where WhiteSource has Renovate. So Renovate is a dependency maintenance tool that supports over 50 package managers. It also supports infrastructure as code. It's actually one of the most popular applications on GitHub. It's got over 200, it's attached to over 250,000 repositories in GitHub that are running this right now. So what it does is it actually allows you to automatically upgrade your libraries, and it does so with merge confidence. So merge confidence, the way it works is actually if you're already running CI in GitHub.com, for example, if you're already running CI, we continually watch that. And if you build successfully, you're considered as a part of the actual statistics. And then if you upgrade using Renovate, we actually take that into account. So we can show if you're upgrading using Renovate and your build doesn't break, that goes into our merge confidence. So what this does is it allows you to safely upgrade libraries without worrying about breaking your build. So a lot of times with the reactive approach I just mentioned, it's almost like a bad dentist who's always giving you fillings instead of talking about prevention. And the best way for preventing vulnerabilities is to just stay up to date in the first place. And if you're only upgrading to the latest security release, you're actually blind to all of the other releases. So now we'll talk a little bit about supply chain security. So malicious package exploits, we did have some examples there from Zvika, but they're rare, but they are incredibly high risk. So warning developers to be on the lookout for supply chain threats doesn't really help. We need a solution for doing that. And just last week, so actually we have WhiteSource Defend, which is a supply chain security solution. So it's installed once and then it's automatic thereafter. It's invisible and it intervenes forcefully. So actually just last week, Defend detected and reported 60 malicious packages that were published on Ruby gems, and they were actually removed from the registry to protect other Defend users from accidentally installing this malicious code. So to summarize, 2019 through 2020 has seen a massive maturity of developer security tools, and security by exception scales the best. So we should be focusing on automation and remediation, and especially prevention. And with that, we'll take any questions that the audience may have.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. All right, let's see. So first question here. You mentioned risk management programs a few times. What does a risk management program look like?
Okay, so a risk management program should be tailored according to the company goals, culture, risk, appetite, and of course, budget. A good place to start would be setting a company open source policy with a clear reference to licenses, rules, and processes such as approval, archiving, and disclosure of compliance artifact. Other than company policy, employee training, choosing the right software composition analysis tool like WhiteSource, or it can be even some other tool like an open source based tool can affect the company ability to shift left and avoid or early detect open source risk, which dramatically lower the cost of remediation. The last point, maybe you should also detect the relevant source of knowledge for each task, whether internal in your company or external service provider.
Okay, thank you. And you also talked a lot about taking a proactive approach to dependency maintenance. So, do you have any other reasons why that reactive approach is only okay?
Yeah, I actually talked about this one. So the reactive approach to just fixing by only upgrading past a security vulnerability, regardless of what tool you're using to detect that vulnerability, you could be upgrading into another security vulnerability. You're not guaranteed to upgrade. So if you upgrade into the latest, the absolute latest version, you're much more likely to not have a security vulnerability that you're upgrading into, which is a problem with a lot of software composition analysis tools today.
That makes sense. All right. Here's a question for Zvika. How do we get our suppliers to tell us which open source modules they're using?
Okay, so the term, and it's something that you need to be aware of, the term called SBOM, translation of software bill of material. When a company uses open source, they need to provide for with this product, they need to provide some compliance artifact to meet the license notice and all the responsibilities for using these licenses. But when exchanging information between vendor and customer, the term SBOM is not the compliance artifact, but it's a kind of format that is readable, and this is what I mentioned, in a format that the other company can read and translate into names of open source component. There are three different types of SBOM. One is SPDX that will become an ISO standard soon. The second one is Cyclone DX, and the third one is SWID. So each company, there is no one standard for all of them, and the company can choose which standard to use. But the other company should be able to use this list and make a translation for themselves to check if there are known vulnerabilities, yes or no.
Okay. All right, folks. Any more questions here? Give it another couple seconds. All right. Well, with that, I just want to remind the audience that today's presentation has been recorded. So yes, Richard, to answer your question, it will be recorded and you will be able to access it later. So if you missed anything or you just want to go back and watch it again, you'll be able to do that. We will send an email to you with directions that will help you access the presentation on demand, or you can visit us at securityboulevard.com/webinars and find this and all our other on-demand webinars for your viewing pleasure. All right, and then it is time to draw our winners for the Amazon gift cards. So let's do that. Our first winner, Douglas F. Douglas, congratulations. Second, we have Tom T. Congratulations, Tom. Our third winner today is Eric T. Eric, congratulations. And finally, we have Wilson B. Congratulations to all our Amazon gift card winners. Thank you so much to the audience for spending your time with us today. And thank you very much to Sam and Zvika for their amazing presentation and for sharing your time and your energy. We hope to see you again sometime soon for another Security Boulevard webinar. Thanks. And I am Sharon Florentine signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.